Hi guys, welcome back to the show. It's your girl Sarah right here on Relax Radio, and I'm super excited to be here on this beautiful Friday morning. All right, now I know Fridays are what we are all excited for, so make sure to stay tuned and make sure to let me know what you are thinking, what your plans are for this weekend as well. All right, because after all, it is a Friday, and Fridays are the way we like to spend our weekend. And every time it is Friday, I think of all of the things that I'm going to do during the weekend, right? And this is like rejuvenating, having fun, getting some really, much needed sleep, because that is something that we really don't get to do during the rest of the week, right? When you're working, when you have so many chores to do, you don't really get to sleep during the weekdays. So the weekend is for sleeping, at least in my opinion. All right, now I'm super excited to be here because I have a lot of interesting and amazing information to share with you. But before I head into that conversation and I share all of these interesting things with you, I want to very quickly remind you that you can, in fact, be a part of this show, all right? All you need to do is just text me or call me on 078 Share your thoughts, share your opinions, because I would love to hear what you have to say, all right? And actually, don't forget to go like us on Facebook and follow us on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok. That way, you can actually make sure that you're always informed and updated about the very latest, and that you're always listening into the conversation and making sure that you are aware about everything that is happening in the world. All right, now something else that you can actually do is to go download the app as well, because that is available on both the Apple App Store and the Google Play Store, and that will actually help you stay informed and updated about everything and join into the conversation from wherever you are in the world. All right, so don't actually forget to do that. And let's actually get into today's conversation, because today we're going to be talking about how North England leaders are calling for a fair distribution of refugees from Afghanistan. All right. Now, let's take it. All right. It's pretty simple. It's pretty obvious as to why they're saying this. All right. Now, we know that there's a crisis in Afghanistan. We know that, the Taliban has taken control of Afghanistan. And obviously, that is why there are a lot of refugees here, refugees from Afghanistan, right? Now, the United Kingdom has actually pledged to take in about 20,000 Afghan refugees, and that means that they have to essentially provide places for these refugees to live in. However, the problem seems to be that in a lot of these areas, a lot of these places, it's only in certain places that there is a high concentration of refugees, right? And this also happens to be the places where there is the most amount of poor people, right? Where people are really deprived, right? And obviously, if you're a leader in one of these parts of England, then that is quite telling of if you're a mayor, and that is quite telling of the region that you take care of, right? And that is why leaders from North England are actually calling for the fair distribution of refugees, because currently most of the refugees or most asylum seekers are in fact in the north of England. All right, and this happens to be one of the biggest problems for them as well, because in terms of education, in terms of costs, in terms of making sure that they have housing facilities, healthcare facilities, and whatnot, they do have a higher cost, they do have a higher burden in comparison to the rest of England, where they don't really have that many asylum seekers or that many refugees, right? Now, an analysis actually showed that areas housing the most asylum seekers are in fact among the most poorest in Britain. All right, and it also found that almost one in four of the UK's 44,825 asylum seekers that are supported by the House Office, or rather the Home Office, they're only housed by just 10 local authorities, right? And 9 of them are in fact among the most deprived in the United Kingdom. So I don't think I have to explain that any further to you, because I think that statistics just makes it quite obvious, just makes it quite clear why exactly this is such a huge problem. All right, so obviously, if you're going to have a high concentration of asylum seekers in a specific part of England, then that's going to affect them negatively, right? Because in terms of the cost that they have to put up with, the maintenance costs, the housing costs, the private healthcare costs, all of that, those are in fact costs for them, right? So if these refugees are not distributed equally, then that will be a much bigger burden on there will be a much bigger burden on the other parts of England than the parts that don't really have refugees. Right now, this happens to be, the biggest problem right now, and that's why leaders from the north of England have in fact called for a fair distribution of refugees, because if not, places like Middlesbrough, Cardiff, Rochdale, and even Glasgow will have the UK's highest number of refugees as a proportion of its population, right? So the population would mostly consist of refugees. Now, only one of the top 10, that is Barking and Dagenham in London, is in the south of England. And even then, the refugee concentration there is much, much less compared to the refugee concentration that is there in the north of England. All right. Now, mayors in the north of England actually said the whole country needs to support those in need, because ministers are currently drawing up plans to actually take in about 20,000 men, women, and children from Afghanistan over the next 5 years. And with that, there also needs to come the responsibility of equal distribution of refugees. All right. Now, make sure you stay tuned, because we're going to head into a small break, and after that, we will be back to discuss this more. But until then, make sure that you stay tuned. Welcome back to the show. It's your girl Sarah right here on Relax Radio, and I'm super, super excited to be here because it is Friday, and Fridays is something that we're all excited for. But don't worry, because I'm here to share my thoughts, share my opinions with you, but also because I want to hear your thoughts and opinions with regard to what we are currently discussing. All right, because we're discussing how leaders from North England have in fact called for the fair distribution of refugees here in the United Kingdom, especially given the fact that most of the refugee concentration within England is prevalent in the north of England. All right, so that seems to be the problem, and that is what we're discussing. Because, as in my opinion, I feel like the entire country does in fact have an equal duty to make sure that there is a fair distribution of refugees, right? Because if not, the cost and the burden of refugees are essentially going to fall on one part of England, and that is unfair, because because we need to make sure that every part of England has an equal responsibility in taking care of these refugees until something is sorted out for them, for their future, and they can go ahead and get back to their lives, right? Obviously, it's not like it's not like in Afghanistan they can get back to things pretty soon, because the truth is, there is a war that's happening, not necessarily a war, but there is a form of rule that is making it very, very hard for people to live, and for people to actually, for people to have freedom, for people to have specific rights. All right, so that is what the conversation is about. Now, if you want to be a part of the show, if you want to share your thoughts, share your opinions with me, don't be shy, because all you need to do is just text me or call me on 078 52473 share your thoughts, share your opinions with me, because that would be absolutely amazing. And I would love to hear what your thoughts and opinions are with regard to North England leaders calling for fair distribution of refugees. All right. And also, before we head into the conversation, I want to very quickly remind you that all you need to do to share your thoughts and share your opinions with us is to actually go like us on Facebook and follow us on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok. All right, because that way you can actually make sure that you're always informed and updated about the very latest, and you're making sure that you're aware of what is happening in the world. And don't forget to download that app either, because that will actually make sure that you're always informed and updated about everything, and you're listening into the conversation from anywhere in the world while you're doing whatever it is that you're doing. All right, and now let's actually head into our conversation, which is basically about refugees, which is about having fair distribution of refugees here in England. All right, now, like I said, there is in fact a problem with regard to the refugees that are currently there in England, right? And Andy Burnham, who happens to be the mayor of Greater Manchester, actually said that the region would welcome refugees under the government's resettlement programs, but that it needs to be fair, and places like Greater Manchester needs to in addition to places like Greater Manchester, other regions should also play their part. All right, because a lot of MPs have repeatedly called for an overhaul of this deeply unfair dispersal system, right? And which is caused, or which often results in those fleeing persecution being housed in areas of severe deprivation, right? With what one deputy mayor actually called as an appalling lack of notification to the local council. All right, now, key considerations for dispersing asylum seekers also include things like availability of private sector housing for rent, even school places, and even local healthcare services, right? So the truth is, if you actually look at the way refugees are being distributed here in the United Kingdom, you basically have one part of United Kingdom that that takes in refugees, and the other part doesn't. So I mean, my question is, don't you have an inherent duty to actually make sure that this is distributed equally, right? And the reason I ask you that is because you can't then expect all of these regions to be like the best region to live in, or the happiest region to live in, if most of the people who live in those regions are in fact poor, right? And let's also talk about these regions in terms of crime, right? We know that when it comes to statistically poor regions, that there is in fact a lot of crime, right? So then these regions are not really going to be safe to live in, and that is solely because the government was just like, oh, you know what, maybe we should just put all of these refugees in one part of England, because the rest of England totally does not have any responsibility, right? And that is absolutely appalling as well, right? Because the truth is, regardless of where you are from England, regardless of what part of England you're from, you still have a duty to make sure that you provide these people with the basic things they need until something is sorted for them. And when I say basic, I mean things like housing, I mean things like healthcare, I mean things like education, because regardless of your status, regardless of whether you're a refugee or you're a citizen, these are basic rights, these are basic needs that anyone should have. All right, so that is what the conversation is about. But don't worry, because I will be back in a few minutes to share my thoughts and opinions with regard to Dominic Raab, right? Especially because he's been under pressure, he's been asked to quit, and he's been asked to resign because of his inefficiency that actually caused a lot of chaos in Afghanistan for people, or rather for UK citizens who were living in Afghanistan. All right, especially people who worked in the embassy and other things. So make sure you stay tuned, because we're going to head into a small break, and after that we will be back to discuss this. But until then, make sure you stay tuned.
The valuations that you place on an asset are always behind you. It's always in hindsight. It's never in front of you. And that's one of the challenge it, right? Because you're always valuing what happened yesterday, and what you need is what's going to happen tomorrow. What am I saving or investing for? Why am I doing it? When will I need the money? And how much money do I need? Yeah. So that's quite important, because when you're looking at your net worth, you've got to start with saying, well, what do I want my net worth to be, so that there's a goal, and then work backwards. How do I get there? And if I can start with £50 or $50 a week, if I save that every week, and you can go online and use calculators online. I don't have to teach you the maths behind it, but you can say, okay, and if I get a 3% return and I put this away for how long will it take to reach my goal? And that's called just this basic cash flow projection calculations.